Stay tuned for a scrumptious offer. The Appalachian Mountains to the east, the Mississippi River to the west, and country music all night long. Yep, this is Tennessee, the volunteer state. But after hearing these creepy tales from Tennessee, you won't be volunteering to enter this state anytime soon. Some buddies and I had been planning a camping trip for a few months in Tennessee. I'm in the Marine Corps, and I had some prior camping experience. We decided that the beginning of the new year would be a good time to go, as we'd all be home at the same time. We had locked down a location through a family friend, and the trip was set. The four of us drove down with our tents and 2 rifles. We linked up with the owner of the property. We all drove excitedly to the over 400 acres of land that would be ours for 3 days and 2 nights. We arrived at the location and started our trek into the dense, bare woods. We got in about 150 yards and picked a nice clearing. We all started setting up our tents and gathering firewood for the night. Throughout the day, we had a full campsite complete with a woodpile and a low burning fire. Myself and another one of my friends had decided to go hunting for anything that we could shoot, skin, or cook. With no luck, we went back to the camp. We had cooked almost all of our food that we'd brought for the trip in a few hours. As the sun set, we all decided we should go get more food, as hunting just wasn't working out. I figured I'd stay back and keep an eye on the fire. Everyone else left, and I sat there stoking the flames, trying to get as warm as possible. As I sat there, randomly, all of Mother Nature went quiet, and I heard something walking around out there. I figured my friends were back and were trying to freak me out, so I hid behind a tree and waited to pop out with my flashlight. I would get them first. I popped out when the time felt right, and I turned on my flashlight. But it wasn't my friends that I saw, yet I was not alone at the campsite. There, next to the campfire, stood a creature nearly 8 feet tall, with legs like a goat or deer, with the hair over its body matted and wet. I found it impossible to close my mouth. I had screamed partially like I planned to, so I knew it knew that I was there. So when was it going to turn around? I could see a snout from my angle, one that looked more canine than anything else. The seemingly random conglomerate of animal parts that made up this creature didn't make sense, but it was effective in scaring the living daylights out of me. It was a sight I would be certain not to forget. But then it screamed, creating a sound that I'd never heard before, one so ethereal and earth-shattering that tears poured from my eyes and I found myself falling to my knees. Then, slowly yet lumbering, it walked away, disappearing from the campsite. It didn't seem interested in me, and I think that's why I'm still here today. My friends returned, and they asked if anything exciting happened. As I sat there by the campfire, huddled closer to it than before, all I could muster was a choked, no. I could tell from their expressions that they thought my reply was weird, but they ignored it and prepared the food they'd brought back. I didn't eat, and when we went to our separate tents for bed, I stayed awake, afraid that if I closed my eyes, the creature could return and drag me or one of my friends away. I watched over them while they lay unconscious, completely unaware of the horror that may lurk just outside the campsite. The following day, even though we had another night to stay, someone got sick, and we had to leave the place early. I thank God that I didn't have to make myself look cowardly, and that I had a different reason why we all needed to leave. I packed up so fast. As we left, I did notice one more thing. There was this black, viscous, and goopy substance splattered on the nearby barren trees where the beast had been standing just hours earlier. I was already finished loading up, so I didn't want to go examine it, let alone touch it. I left it where it was, a reminder that it would be best and safest to never come back here. In fact, I've never gone back into the woods in southern Tennessee, and I think it best that you avoid it yourself. At the very least, be wary. I had recently moved from Ireland to the USA, specifically to the border of North Carolina and Tennessee. Our land was basically sitting on a plot of woodland and forest expanse. It continues on to the Cherokee National Park. I began noticing things a few weeks after we arrived. I was pretty much settled into my new environment and in awe of everything around me. Ireland is pretty much a bubble compared to this place. It was early July, and it was so humid. There was a dead heat in the air. I was lying on the wooden swing chair on the back deck. I was on the phone chatting with a friend of mine, basically just relaxing and enjoying the weather. I was kind of melting from the heat, to be honest, my pale skin turning to a more lovely shade of pink. It was evening. I hung up the phone and lay there gathering my thoughts, getting the last few rays of sun before going back inside. Just before going back in, I began doodling on the back of my notepad when I suddenly heard the sound of banging coming from just inside the tree line. It was about half a football pitch distance away. I'm not good with measurements or distances, to be honest. It sounded like someone hitting a tree hard with a flat of a hurley, or something harder. It was like wood on wood loud, and it was so hard it was comparable to gunshots. Startled and confused, I scanned the area, but I didn't notice anything strange. Shaking my head, I went back inside. I mentioned to my sister that it sounded like there was someone out there. Maybe they were cutting timber or something. She looked at me with an eyebrow raised. She said there shouldn't be anyone near here, as it was our property and nobody should be cutting our timber. I explained in further detail what I heard. Together we walked back outside. We walked across the yard and to the fence line, but we didn't see anyone. After a bit of confusion, we shrugged our shoulders together and forgot about it. We figured if we did see anybody, we would let them know they were trespassing. I lived on the property with my sister Amy, her husband Jason, and my awesome little nephew Adam, who was 4 years old at the time. Everything was basically all new to us here. The sounds, the smells, the wildlife, everything was so different compared to Ireland. And I'm a nature buff at heart. I love fishing, hunting, but the lands and wildlife of the US are very different to Ireland. Irish wildlife can't kill you, unless you're really dumb, really drunk, you're allergic to bees, or you get yourself knocked out while running from a wasp. As for our home, we sat nestled in the middle of nowhere. We were surrounded by wilderness, woodland, and meadows. In the shallow parts of the woods, there were small streams. And beyond the woods were rolling mountains. It was so incredibly secluded that it was peaceful, awesome, the kind of view that would take your breath away. And knowing what I know now, I understand that the things I saw out there, I can understand why they go unseen for so long. My sister bought her property, and from what I know, it was empty for around 6 months before she moved in. As the days and weeks passed after I heard those noises, I heard new ones. At times there would be strange whistling sounds coming from the woods, often accompanied by more wood knocks. Sometimes if I was close enough, I would even hear movement in the trees, and if I tried to get too close, it sounded like something would begin shaking a nearby tree, as if to scare or intimidate me. Needless to say, it worked. All of this baffled everyone that lived there. We tried to explain it as people hunting or bears. There were times when all of us together felt brave enough to investigate the surrounding woodland, but we never did see or find anything. I have to add we never felt in danger, though. We were always cautious with Adam, and always kept a close eye on him while he played outdoors. It never felt too unsafe for him to play out there, especially if one of us was watching. This whole ordeal became the family mystery and the basis of many of our jokes. Us Irish have dark and twisted minds sometimes, and a strange sense of humor, so getting dragged into the forest by bears or eaten alive by flesh-eating possums was the common joke to my poor sister by myself and Jay. Halfway through August of that year, the realness of what was happening to us finally hit home, and I became very aware of what was really in the forest surrounding us. It was the weekend. Adam and I went on an adventure checking out the area, hunting for treasure, finding weird animals. You know how it is with 4-year-olds, everything's cool and mind-blowing. We crossed the fence line and spent a couple of hours foraging for critters, placing them in jars, watching birds, never straying too far from the home, 'cause his little legs and all. But we went far enough all the same, and had stopped and sat on a long dead tree trunk that lay in a small open area within the woodland. My phone suddenly rang, and I had a chat with my sister. It was time to head back because the barbecue was finishing up. When I got off the phone and placed it back in my pocket, I looked over at Adam, who was laughing and staring off into the distance, making faces at something. I had been sitting beside him on the log, but I stood up after the phone rang to get it from my pocket. I had been moving and walking back and forth, kicking dirt up as you do on the phone. Anyway, I asked him with a smile, "What you laughing at, buddy?" His reply sent literal chills down my spine. "I'm copying the brown boy." He laughed. He found it really, really funny, but I was immediately creeped out. "What boy?" I said, while I bent down and logged Adam up into my arms. He is pretty small even for a 4-year-old, and my protective instinct had kicked in. 100 different thoughts crossed my mind. He then pointed to an area of large trees and bushes that looked impenetrable about 15 feet from us. "He's got a funny face and was doing it like this." Adam went on, grinning as wide as he physically could. "Where is he?" I whispered. I noticed how quiet the woods around us had gotten. Maybe it was just my fear and shock, but everything seemed so silent. I stepped toward the trees where he pointed, with Adam in my arms, and I heard what I swear was the sound of a chimpanzee, that sort of chimp-like howl, but much deeper, coming from my left into the woodland. As this froze me in place, it was like I knew not to move any closer to the trees where Adam had pointed, or I would pay dearly. With my heart pounding, knowing something wasn't right, everything felt wrong. I turned, gripping Adam tight, and started moving back towards home. Adam was still facing behind me as I held him and shrieked with excitement and laughter. "There he is," he said. I turned before he had the words completely out, and crossing where we had been sitting, moving away from where he pointed, was a small, hairy, human-like boy. He was a little taller than Adam, but so much wider and covered in hair from head to toe. It wasn't actually a boy, but it wasn't anything that I had ever seen. It stopped for a split second, looked at me, but another loud hoot or howl that seemed closer than before snapped its attention away from us, shocking or even commanding it to move. It practically lunged quickly behind trees towards where the sound had come from. It was out of sight in a matter of moments. I was frozen as Adam tried to wriggle out of my arms, and I realized how heavy he was getting. A million more thoughts raced through my mind. What in the world was that? It definitely wasn't human. I told Adam to hold on tight as I began to run as fast as I could with the two of us. The entire time, I felt watched and followed. Whatever it was, it continued to make sounds, and each time it did, it wasn't any further behind me. Within 15 minutes, give or take, I was back over the fence, and I'd put Adam down on the ground, telling him to go to his mom quickly while I scanned the surrounding forest and fence line for any further signs of danger. I could see Jay, my sister, and 2 of their friends at the side of the house, sitting on a bench next to the barbecue as Adam ran happily over. I didn't see how he wasn't scared. I turned and looked back over the fence and was overwhelmed with the feeling that I was being watched still. I looked back at Adam, and he was already on the bench beside Amy. The image of that brown creature, or the brown boy as Adam had called him, ran back through my mind as I tried to make sense of it. I'm fairly sure it was a he. It was chestnut in color, around 3.5 feet tall, a bit taller than Adam. It had hair about 3 inches long covering its whole body, except for small patches of its face. The skin I could see was brown, but a different shade, a bit more tan and lighter in color. More like leather, I guess. It had deep eye sockets with very dark, nearly black eyes. It was very much like an ape with large eyebrow ridges. Its arms were abnormally long, and its body frame for something so small was awfully wide. Just from the look of it, it looked like it was going to be huge. It was the same way you could look at a foal and tell that its proportions and body shape were going to be quite large, but it's different from creature to creature. But just by looking at its face, I could tell it was young and had that awkward movement to it when it walked, the way an adolescent would. Its head was wide too and oddly shaped, and its mouth was at least twice as big as a human's. I understand now why Adam grinned back at it so wide, with all his teeth showing, because that's what the creature's face sort of looked like. With all of this in mind, I realized the deeper sound we'd heard from the woods, the one the adolescent creature had run off towards, that was probably its parent, and it sounded big. I could still feel the adrenaline rushing through my body. I realized my hands were shaking then still, and then another realization. One final one, the cherry on top of the sundae. It was freaking Bigfoot. I hadn't heard too many stories, but what I had heard of, it matched this thing perfectly. So what in the actual F? A baby Bigfoot was making faces at my nephew. I was broken out of my stupor when I heard movement to my right in the woods. I looked in that direction, watching and listening. The tree knocks came, but luckily they were much further away in the woods than before. I went right over to my sister and grabbed her, pulling her aside and telling her everything. After a lot of convincing, she believed what I saw and believed that Adam saw something too. But she insisted it wasn't what I thought it was, so I stopped trying to tell her that Bigfoot was real. But Jay did believe me and had many experiences himself up to that point, but so far for him, they were just sounds, not sightings. He mostly kept his experiences to himself because his wife would just call him crazy, and admittedly he was a conspiracy buff. Neither of us were able to convince Amy of Bigfoot. What it did do, though, was make us all a little more tense and cautious while out and about, and especially in the yard with Adam. Countless times afterwards, I asked Adam to explain what he saw. From what he has told me, when my phone rang, that was the first time he made contact with the brown boy. He saw him peering out from behind the tree, and from the face he made and showed me, I think the creature was sniffing the air, then began to smile like a chimp does. And if you've read up on chimps, they don't smile like humans do. Theirs doesn't show happiness, it showed concern, intimidation, submission. Not a positive sign at all. Then again, maybe these Bigfoot things are more akin to people than chimps, and it was truly playing with Adam. I couldn't find any other explanation for this event besides Bigfoot, no matter how much I tried, no matter how much I tried to rationalize it. These things, to me, they definitely exist. But why are we not told more of them? None of it made sense, and I found it so hard to even say the word Bigfoot, because it sounded crazy. The only way to convince other people, it seems, is to show them themselves, to take them right into the woods and put them face to face with the Bigfoot. This was only the beginning of our interactions and encounters with the brown boy and the hairy people in the forest. I live in the Smoky Mountains in northeast Tennessee. I personally believe that these mountains are some of the most beautiful mountains in the world, especially in autumn. Even with all their beauty, their splendor, they come with many dangerous and unexplainable things, whether that be bears, panthers, crazy hillbillies, or creatures of the unknown. The story I'm about to share with you happened to my grandfather. I was born late in his life, and I never got to actually meet him. But he was a very educated and faith-filled man. He walked to school every day in the freezing cold, snow, and even rain. He read his Bible front to back numerous times until the pages were barely hanging onto the spine. I have no reason not to believe what he saw that night, no reason to deny that what he claimed was real wasn't real. What scares me the most about his story is that it happened on the very same road on which I live. Let me give you a picture. I live in a hollow, which, if you didn't know, is usually a dead-end road that has very few houses in it, which are not necessarily close to each other. There are rarely any streetlights in the hollows where I live, and at this point in time, there were none in mine. My grandfather frequently walked the dark road at night when he would visit his family that lived about a quarter-mile up the road. The road is surrounded by dense forest on each side, so there's little to no light coming in from the moon. I myself would never walk alone in the dark up that road, even if someone paid me. One night, my grandfather decided to go home after spending an afternoon with his family. It was already pitch black outside, but, as I said, that didn't bother him. He'd done it many times before, and he felt perfectly safe walking these familiar roads. He knew everyone who lived on them. He had no reason to be afraid. It was wintertime, so he didn't have to worry about coming across a bear and her cubs, which made it even less intimidating for him, which again was never much. He bid his goodbyes and started down the shadowy road. Everything seemed normal, yet it was much quieter that night. He didn't pay much mind, though. Sometimes when snow is coming, it gets eerily quiet in the mountains. He kept walking, his hands in his coat pockets and his eyes glued to his feet. Even though it was close to almost completely black out, he could still see a few yards ahead of him. He looked up from his feet to glance at the road before him, and he saw it then and there. A figure. The figure was inhumanly large. It was stocky and seemed to walk with a hunch. It had the shape of a man, but he couldn't make out any clothes or other features. It was just solid darkness. He squinted his eyes and blinked a couple of times, yet it was still there. It was walking in front of him at a brisk pace. It didn't make a sound when it walked, and this sent chills up my grandpa's spine. He decided to stop and let it walk down the road until it was out of eyesight, but when he stopped, the figure stopped. He felt his heart begin to pound in his chest, fear rushing through him. What was this? Why didn't he see it walking when he left his family's home? How long had it been in front of them? After standing and waiting to see if the figure would move at all, my grandfather decided to slowly begin to walk to see if it would move on. Sure enough, it did. It moved slowly, carefully, just as my grandfather did. Terror filled his body as he slowly trekked down the road. He was about 200 feet from his home, which was a relief, but also terrified him because he couldn't tell yet if this thing was going to follow him inside. He stopped again to see if it would move, maybe just keep going this time, but he sighed because the thing stopped again. How did it instantly know he was stopping, and why did it stop with him? My grandfather continued on, walking faster than before. Maybe if he could run, he thought, it would get spooked and run off. He gathered up his courage and began to walk at a brisk pace. The figure seemed to glide effortlessly at an even faster speed. This scared my grandfather so much that he slowed down to a walk. What would normally take about 30 seconds to walk took him 5 minutes. The figure walked as slow as my grandfather did the whole time. Just as my grandfather got to the house, his eyes still locked on the figure, it turned. It turned and glided up a small bridge across the road towards one of the neighbors' houses. My grandfather ran into his house and locked the door, just happy to be safe and sound. Maybe this would be the last time he would ever have to see that thing. Maybe he didn't even see it. Maybe he was just tired from working in the tobacco patch all day. He shook his head and went to sleep, exhausted from work and from fear. The following day, he headed down to the small gas station about half a mile down the main road. His friends and him always met there to talk and goof around with each other. That morning when he walked inside, his friends were unusually quiet and had concerned looks on their faces. "What's wrong?" he asked them. One of them looked up at him, his face pale and eyes red. "John passed away last night. He had a heart attack in his sleep." My grandfather felt a pit grow on his stomach. He remembered the figure he had saw the night before. It walked straight across the bridge and right up to his neighbor John's house. My grandfather always said he believed it was death that he saw in front of him that night, yet he never understood why he saw it and why it seemed to follow him like that. But he never spoke of it to anyone except to my father, and my father told me. I believe he did see death that night. I'm just glad it didn't choose him to be its victim that dark night. So if you like these stories, then hit the like button, press the notification bell, and subscribe for more spine-tingling content, and we will see you in the next story.